Part 1, Chapter 1, The Early Memories. On the 30th day of July, 1969, I came into this world. I would say that this is the best place to begin. I cannot think of a more appropriate place than that. I was named Gary Todd Bettis after my father, Gary. According to Dad and Mom, they never intended for me to go by my first name. They always planned for me to be called Todd. The hospital I was born in was Passavant Memorial Area Hospital in Jacksonville, Illinois. Jacksonville sits squarely in the middle of the state and from almost any direction. I was the first male child born to Gary Virgil and Laura Mae Cox Bettis. I was 7 pounds, 15 and a half ounces, and 20 inches long. I wonder why they measure that half ounce myself. Maybe that was important in a way I simply don't understand. I was a happy and bouncing baby boy, according to my mother. Honestly, I think I looked like a little old man in those pictures from the hospital. If I remember right, my mother's father, Grandpa Cox, was the first one to offer that opinion of my first appearance in this world. I think he was right. Since none of us remember the day we were born, we learn everything from those around us. Most of what I've learned from those early days is from my mom. She was not only the first one in my life, though. The day I went home, I went to 13 Brogdon Street in Murrayville, Illinois. It's a tiny town not far from Jacksonville. We have our Bettis family reunions in that town to this day. I went home with Dad and Mom to a home with my 2 sisters, Kelly and Angie. There will be quite a bit more I will share about those 2 in the chapters to come. I will offer this now, though. To this day, I have an absolutely wonderful relationship with both of my sisters. I'll cover that in more detail in future chapters. We still joke about my birth, though. Those 2 insist Dad and Mom took one look at me and said, "We are done. No more after we have this one." Ha, funny girls they are. On the other hand, I have always interpreted my birth in a different manner. I share with them as necessary this. My take is more of Dad and Mom saying, "What a perfect child. We simply could not do better, so let's stop with him." Yeah, we have some fun with my birth. Good fun, though. I love my sisters very much. One subject I want to enter in my story now is the color red. With the title being what it is, I thought you might be wondering when the color red would enter my story. At this point in my life, I had no problem with the color at all. One of the earliest pictures we have of me, I'm wearing a bright red set of overalls. Red was already a part of my life, though, but I was not aware of it at this early age. I was a chubby little guy, but I was happy. I had no real idea of how the color red shaped my life. How is your memory of the earliest years of your life? I have a theory about how some people seem to remember so many things from the earliest years of their lives. I do not have many memories of my earliest years. My first memories begin when I had to move from Murrayville to a little town a few miles away. I still consider it my hometown, in a way. That town is Carlinville, Illinois. We lived in a 2-story house with a huge front porch. Please remember, I was about 5 years old. Now, I've been back to that house in recent years. The porches on those houses really were not all that large. I guess when you're 5, they are, though. We only lived there a few years. I have so many memories of that house and my life there. That's really where my story begins to take shape. Will you join me in going back? I remember always feeling safe. I realize now that it was a special time in our country. At the same time, I want to give credit where credit is due. Dad and Mom gave us that safe home. I realize now not every child had what I had. Dad was an engineer with GTE, the General Telephone Electronics. We were basic middle class. Mom did not work when I was very young, but eventually worked part-time for Montgomery Ward. They were a Sears kind of store at the time, and as far as I knew, the world had very few limits. Well, unless you included the boundaries my parents set around our neighborhood. I could cross the street to play and even use that street as our playground. I do not remember any family having two cars. Everyone had one, and a lot of those were station wagons. The street we lived on was not highly traveled, and there were just not as many cars around anyway. I was allowed to circle the block, but I seldom did. In fact, I can only remember going all the way around that block, once or twice. I also remember how uneasy I felt doing that. You see, it really was a special time and place. I hope you had a time and place in your childhood like that, at least for a little while. I realize not everyone has that kind of life. That hurts me to think of those things. I wonder how different our country, culture, and communities would be if each and every child had that kind of life. I did not do anything to deserve it, nor did the children do anything to deserve a more difficult family life. That's the thought that sticks with me to this day. I would say I have memories very similar to many of you, and yet different in some ways as well. I remember learning to ride my bike on that street. Oh yes, right down the middle of that street. Kelly was right there to give me the momentum to get me going, and the encouragement to keep me pedaling. I could throw a joke in here about how she may have been there just to see me crash. That may bring a chuckle in the crowd, but I know it's not true. She genuinely wanted to see me succeed. She's the same way to this day. I want to pause as I write this. If this is my story, I want to be myself. As I share that story, I think of other stories. When I think of Kelly lovingly helped me learn, I wonder about you. Do you have moments in your life when someone genuinely and lovingly helped you get something accomplished? Have you thanked them? Maybe it was something significant, like riding a bike for the first time. It could be smaller or even much larger. I wonder how often we stop long enough to acknowledge those moments. They are not trivial. Do we offer to be the one genuinely guiding and loving someone when they need us? Yeah, I wonder about those things. I also remember swinging golf clubs on the back patio with my friend Charlie. May I offer a suggestion here? Please allow the person with you to take a step back before swinging a golf club. I didn't get far away enough from Charlie before he swung. Take it from me, a 7-iron to the jaw and the lip is not a fun afternoon. That one still makes my teeth ache. Ouch. Of course, during all that time, I was just being a boy. I did have school. I do not remember much about my school days. I apologize to my teachers. I do remember performing in a school play. Mom tells me it was first grade. Without her input, I would have had no idea of the year. I remember it fairly well, though. It had something to do with the American Revolution. I vividly remember getting the lead as America. I hear we all get our 15 minutes of fame. Maybe I received mine in a school play in 1976. According to Mom, it was the lead part. I do remember having a lot of lines to memorize. I wore a construction paper crown, and we had yarn around our necks holding the signs telling all the viewers who we were. I knew my arch rival was England. At the time, I had no idea why America and England simply did not get along. Our audience was a gym floor full of mostly mothers. At that time, most moms stayed home to raise the kiddos. They came to fill the gym when their little ones were on display. I want to share an event now that in the end was not a big deal. I have shared it a time or two in recent years when I felt it fit. I realize that many of you reading this may have stories along this line that are much more severe than my own. There may also be a few of you who feel these experiences are simply a part of childhood, and we all need to suck it up and get on with it. I see both sides. This is just a small sample of how I remember it happening. I was one of the youngest kids on our little street. I may have been the youngest. Many of our neighbors had children and some of them were grown-ups. Please remember, I was 6 or 7 years old. Anyone old enough to hold a job was a grown-up to me. Basically, anyone over the age of 16 was a grown-up. One of our neighbors in the house right beside us, his mother will be in the story coming soon. Well, he had a job. So you guessed it, in my eyes, he was a grown-up. He had a job at Kentucky Fried Chicken. I have no idea why I remember that. Anyway, I'll just offer right here, I have never been fond of my name. As I mentioned earlier, I was named after my dad, but never called Gary. Todd was what everyone in my world called me. Everyone except this guy who worked at KFC. He must have felt it was his duty to call me Toad. I realize now his creativity was a 1 on a scale of 1 to 10, and I'm being generous with that 1. I do not remember him calling me that very many times. I guess he didn't have to. Toad stuck. I remember how much I hated it. If you know me today, you may know I don't like the word hate. I know it's necessary, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. I didn't have those feelings against the word hate at that age, so yes, I hated it. I wish I could say I learned from that, and I never called anyone a name after that. I cannot say that, because it's simply not true. I have done that. I'm not proud of that. I do not know your world or your life. I wonder if either of those or both of those shoes fit you. Maybe you were hurt by a name you did not want or deserve. Could it be you, like me, were the one dishing out a little pain later on? I wonder why we don't learn. Yeah, those things make me pause and take a deep breath. I'll go ahead and share a story about the young man's mother I mentioned in the last story. On this particular day, Dad and Mom are both gone. I believe it had something to do with what was coming in the next chapter that I'll cover. It was not common, but it was not unusual either. Remember, we had a very tight community right there. At the end of our little street was a trailer park. The two areas were only separated by a road, but it was a busy road, and I was not allowed to cross that road. Not at all. Not without permission. I only remember ever crossing it a few times anyway. There also happened to be another blonde-headed little boy who was about my age who lived in that trailer park. I think he was a little younger than me, though. He was always riding his large bike up and down that street, but the bike was just too big for him. Maybe you've seen a similar setup with a little boy or a little girl on a bike, and they really can't even reach to sit on the seat. If they can, once seated, they can't reach the pedals or the ground. You get the idea. So this boy happened to be riding on that road. I did not see what happened, but I heard it. What I heard were the screeching of car tires. That sound seemed to last for minutes. I reluctantly walked out onto that big front porch and looked out the door. Just past the intersection at the end of the road, that boy was laying in the road with that bike lying beside him. The car was still there too. About that time, our neighbor came out and saw him on the road. She had no way of knowing it wasn't me. It was a small blonde boy hit by a car. She started screaming my name with her hand over her mouth. As a parent today, I can imagine a little more the terror that she felt. After all, my parents weren't home, and she probably knew that. I'm sure her heart almost stopped. To this day, I don't remember how or why she turned and saw me standing on the porch next door. Did one of my sisters get her attention? Did she just happen to turn and see me? I don't know how it happened, but I remember the relief that I could actually see on her face. I didn't really understand at that age, but I have a better understanding now. The adults eventually had conversations about that boy. He was okay, but I think he suffered a broken leg. I don't know if that's okay or not, but considering what could have happened, it was a good outcome, I guess. There were also police officers who came out and measured the skid marks. I was told they could tell by the length of those marks how fast the car was going. I still remember that. Those marks were there for a long time. I think of those marks each time I've ever seen or felt my anti-lock brakes kick in today. This was also the time when my lifelong love entered my world. I was 6 when my dad bought me my first BB gun. Oh, how I remember that day. Yes, we lived in town, and I'm not sure what Dad was thinking. Well, I'm quite certain it was Dad's idea. So to be fair, I don't know what he specifically was thinking. It was heavenly for me, though. Of course, I received the usual speech. Yes, there were rules to be minded, or I would lose my privileges with that new gift. For the most part, I kept them. I'm sure you caught the "for the most part" statement. If you keep reading, you will see that I'm not a saint. That will become quite clear. One hard and fast rule was not to shoot at anything at close range. Dad told me all about Ricochet. Do you see the moment from A Christmas Story coming when Ralphie shoots himself in the eye? If you do not see it, you should. You see, there was a sweet gum tree in our backyard. At the time, I had no idea what a sweet gum tree was. You'll hear more about me and trees later. I simply stepped up to that tree, and one of its lower branches was right there. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? That BB gun was powerful enough to embed that BB inside that limb, right? Well, in my 6-year-old brain, it was going to blow that limb right off. So what actually happened? Remember that word, ricochet? I remember it like it was yesterday. I took aim, I pulled the trigger. It was as if that BB was an asteroid headed for Earth. It was small, and then larger, and bang! You guessed it. It hit me right in the eye. Looking back, I know how fortunate I was that it truly did no damage. Of course, I am the all-American kid, and I ran inside crying to tell Dad and Mom that I had disobeyed and that they were right. Come on now. I hope you didn't buy that. Goodness, no. I kept that story a secret for years. That was between a young boy, his BB gun, and that sweet gum tree. An event that was about to shape my entire life was on the horizon. Dad and Mom had purchased 14 acres just a few miles from that town of Carlinville. Dad was about to begin building our new home. The next 2 years or so were about to affect the next 40 years to come.